Now, a few words of thanks. First, thank you to Trice Hyman, the Schusterman Center's administrative support specialist, for his amazing work putting this event together, all of the challenges of an international event in technology. Thank you to my colleague, Professor Daniel Simon, who's Assistant Director and Editor-in-Chief of World Literature Today. As many of you know, World Literature Today is an award-winning magazine of international literature and culture that's housed here at the University of Oklahoma. It's a precious source of beauty and culture here on the plains and around the world. And most importantly, I want to thank our distinguished speaker, Angelina Muñiz-Huberman, and her translator, D.P. Snyder. Angelina and Dorothy's work reminds us of the healing power of words, creativity, and community in our tortured world. And I am so grateful to them. And now Daniel Simon will introduce our speakers.
Thank you much. Thank you so much, Rona. Welcome, everyone. It's really just an honor and a great pleasure to be here with you today. I will just briefly introduce our speakers and then pitch it to D.P. Snyder to begin. But if you haven't already seen it, there's an excerpt from Dr. Muñiz-Huberman's novel that's in the March issue of WLT, and I can put a link in the chat. Maybe you'll be able to see it, but I hope you'll go find that story, which is the basis of their talk today. And really just, it's been a great pleasure for me since at least 2012, helping partner with the Schusterman Center on bringing in writers from Gerald Stern all the way up to today, and having these wonderful exchanges, and also so many faculty that are affiliated with the center be contributing editors to WLT over the years. So it's just an honor for me to have this family here at the University of Oklahoma. So by way of introduction, I will introduce first our honored guest. Born in the south of France to Spanish parents, Angelina Muñiz-Huberman is the author of over 50 books and a retired professor at the School of Philosophy and Literature at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, known as UNAM. She is known for her work as a medievalist and for her writing about the exile experience, Sephardic mysticism, crypto-Judaism, and the Kabbalistic tradition in Jewish Iberia. She has received numerous awards and honors for her work, including an honorary doctorate from UNAM in 2022. Since 2021, she has also held the 7th chair of the Mexican Academy of Letters. D.P. Snyder is a bilingual writer, poet, and translator between English and Spanish. Her full-length works include Arrhythmias by Angelina Muñiz-Huberman, which was the subject of our wonderful book club conversation on Monday, as well as books by Alberto Chimal, Juan Carlos Carballo, and Mónica Lavín. Her translations have been anthologized most recently in a collection called Constellation. She is a frequent contributor to WLT, an editorial board member at Reading and Translation, and a recent co-chair of the PEN America Translation Committee, which does vital work. Please join me in welcoming D.P. Snyder and Angelina Muñiz-Huberman. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you so much, Rona. World Literature Today is so important in this world, more important than ever. Many thanks to the Schusterman Center for inviting Angelina and me here today, and to Trice for coordinating our technology. Angelina, it's so good to see you on the screen. We have much to talk about, so I'm going to dive right in with our conversation. We decided between us that we were going to ask a few short questions based on the recent issue of World Literature Today. And I chose a quote from Susan Sontag's essay regarding the pain of others that's noted in Ethiopian American writer Dinao Mangetsu's article. And the quote is the following: "The other, even when not an enemy, is regarded only as someone to be seen, not someone like us, who also sees. So, Angelina, when you give interiority to a transgender surgeon in medieval Spain, as you do in La Burladora de Toledo, the trickster of Toledo, are you thinking about giving the other eyes to see? And in short, what compels you to write about outsiders and persecuted people?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Ronald, Daniel, and Misha, and of course, Dorothy, for inviting me to this conversation. So, answering your question, well, first of all, this is a character, Elena de Céspedes, which is a historical character of the 17th century in Spain. I heard of her, and then I decided that this Elena Eleno was very appropriate to be a metaphor of the exile. Exile is my experience because, as Daniel said, after the Spanish Civil War, that's why my parents went to France and I was born there. Then I went to Cuba and then to Mexico. So I have been since my childhood in different countries and adapted or not adapted to them. And looking about the history of Elena Eleno, the trickster of Toledo, I decided that she is a very complicated character. She is the daughter of a slave, Falasha, that was taken into Spain, and she is the daughter of this slave and the owner of the house, because that was what they used to do. But she was educated, she started to write, she started to learn many things, and then she wanted to go to the university. She first she married a man and had a child, and then she left them and went to the university dressed as a man. And she was not discovered, because this used to happen sometimes at this time in which the university was forbidden for a woman. So in this time she found that she was also attracted by feminine persons, so females. So she married the second time with a woman dressed like a man. And then all these situations of the Middle Ages that I like, alchemy, Kabbalist, Gnosticism, I thought that she was a kind of exile also, because sometimes she was a woman and sometimes he was a man. The problem is that once she was delated to the Inquisition, and then she was visited in the Inquisition by two doctors. One decided she was a woman and the other decided she was a man. She was a hermaphrodite. So, and this also make me the situation of the borderlines of being here and being there and being capable of acting as different persons. So, pues, that's why I pick up this character.
So she embodies exile for you, and it's a kind of internal exile because she's so unique, not only in herself, but also in history, that she just combines everything that is interesting to you, and you choose characters like Elena Eleno over and over again, rewriting stories, like, for example, we talked this weekend about Sor Juana, but you've written about Teresa de Jesus, for example, as a character in Morada Interior. And all of these stories are really in the genre that is the neo-historical novel. And I wondered if you might talk to the audience a little bit about what the neo-historical novel is and how you've worked within that genre.
Well, first I'll tell something I forgot to say. Crypto-Judaism. After 1492, the date of expulsion of the Jews that had lived for several centuries in Spain, there was a situation they could go away or they could rest in Spain, but convert into Catholicism. So there was a special category called Crypto-Judaism for those who in their house, inner, another exile situation, they were Jews and have all the feast and the celebrities and everything. But the moment they went out of the house and they were on the street, they were Catholics and they had to go to church and also the Christian festivities. So that's also a border situation like the Elena Eleno. About the other question that you said, Dorothy, new historical novel. This is not a typical or a 100% historical novels that were initiated in the 19th century with the Romanticism, but they were novels, of course, but they follow the history exactly. The new historical novel, which was studied by Seymour Menton of the University of California in Irvine, it takes out many liberties or freedoms and follows a small line of history, and then the rest is imagination, pure imagination, because always historical characters, even the most important, have a part of the life that you don't know, some years that you don't know, or something that happened between, or something that he or she were thinking. So that is the part of that is called neo-historical novel. Also, now it has another name, I don't remember. So I take many freedoms. No, not freedoms. What is
Liberties?
Liberties? Okay. With this Elena Eleno, because some parts of the history you don't know, and some others, yes, you know. In the papers of the Inquisition, you can find out how she was accused, how everything. But then, in fact, it is the first woman with a medical title. She could finish the whole studies of medicine, and she's considered the first woman in history to be a medical.
Right, to be a surgeon.
A
No,
surgeon.
and also to be a soldier.
Oh, yes.
And she was a soldier as well.
Went to the army, and several years she was a surgeon of the soldiers. So it's a very interesting, fascinating character.
So for you, the character of Elena Eleno is fascinating. Of course, she just is fascinating and unique in history. But she also represents something. She represents exile, an exile within, an exile within herself, within her society. And that takes us to the idea of exile and also crypto-Judaism, because I remember last year when I went to Spain and I took a train to Toledo specifically because of this novel. And I went to a temple there that had been turned into a Catholic church and now has been restored as a museum, not as an actual functioning temple, but as a museum. And it was fascinating to see the Jewish altar underneath the Christian altar. And I sent you an email and said, this is incredible. I mean, this place, Toledo, is a place where Muslims and Jews and Catholics all live together. And yet we have this issue of having to hide your Judaism in that period of the Inquisition, that lengthy period. That's very personal to you because you only found out. At what age did you find out that you were Jewish?
Well, in fact, yes, this is after 1492, the Crypto Jewish. And I am descendant of this tradition of Crypto Judaism because I was 6 years old when my mother told me, because the Judaism was transmitted was on the female line. So because females were inside the house, so that is why the Judaism was kept inside, inner exile, as you say. And so she told me that we were from Jewish ancestors, and she told me many things, and even she told me to make a sign that in fact women don't do it, but she taught me to do it, because with that sign with the hands, you could be recognized as a Jewish, and it's the Shema. Ken?
The symbol.
The symbol of the Shaddai, Ken. And now I'm speaking in Hebrew. Excuse me.
No, I'm here to help.
So I started to learn everything about Judaism, and when I was going to marry, because my husband is Jewish, I converted, or I say that reconverted into Judaism. So well, that's the story of one of the stories, and then I have the Spanish from Civil War, and then the Jewish origin, and all this mishmash makes me write as I write.
It's marvelous. I think I want to emphasize that you and your family, as you noted, and as Rona noted as well, moved from country to country to country. And finally, you and Alberto settled in Mexico, and specifically in Mexico City. And I wonder, what makes you a Mexican writer? What makes you a Mexican writer besides spending most of your life in Mexico? And is exile, or the idea of exile, the experience of exile, does that create a kind of imaginary virtual country that you are a citizen of, along with exiles everywhere, this kind of floating land that is the land of exile that occupies so much space in your work?
Well, what I consider myself, I consider yes and no Mexican, French, and Spanish, It depends of the moment what I am. So it's very handy, no? So well, that's a problem outside myself. If they consider me a Mexican writer because I have received Mexican prizes and I have Mexican nationality, but also Spanish nationality. So all this mixture, as I said before, even in the classification of our generations, because I belong on the Spanish exile to a generation that is called Hispano-Mexican, Spanish-Mexican, because we have origins from the Spain, and then I arrived at Mexico when I was 16, excuse me, 6. But the older of my generation that arrived also as children was 12 or 13 years old. So from 6 to 13, and we started writing in Mexico. So they consider us, as I told you, Spanish Mexican, but they also consider us with a very interesting Nahuatl Indian language, which is Nepantla. And Nepantla in Nahuatl, in this Indian language, means not being in that land and in this land, which is perfect explanation of the situation of my writer, of my generation. So we have all this mixture that, again, tells you how to write things as arrhythmias, which means rhythms, not a rhythm established, but very short, very long,
That
up
word
and down.
that I used in the text that you liked so much, herky-jerky, a herky-jerky rhythm. It's not regular.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that word Nepantla, we have to really admire that word, because I certainly do, because the idea that from neither here nor there is a concept that's embodied in a single word, Nepantla, that's Nahuatl. That conception of oneself as being forever from neither here nor there is such a wonderfully arrhythmic concept. I want to move just for a moment to the often cited fact that you are responsible, according to all the experts, you are responsible for introducing Sephardic mysticism into Mexican literature. And I'd like to talk a little bit, if you talk a little bit about who you are as a Jewish writer. You're a Mexican writer, you're a Spanish writer, you're a medievalist who also writes, and you're a Jewish writer. And when I think of you as a Jewish writer, I think very much about two things, well, three things really: exile, which we've spoken about, but also mysticism and humor. And I wonder if you might talk to the audience a bit about the role that both those things, mysticism and humor, play in your writing.
Well, I started to find out some historical characters that were Sephardic, that were, this we go to the medieval ages. For example, Yehuda ben Levi, Maimonides, etc. So I found one very interesting, Benjamin of Tudela, who was a traveler from Spain to the Holy Land, to Israel, in the 14th century. And he wrote a book about his travelings and going from one place from one Jewish community in Spain to Jewish community in France, in Italy, etc., in Egypt, and then at last in Israel, the Holy Land. And the same thing, as a diary, it has only some parts of his life. And I wrote a book that is called The Merchant, not of Venice, but of Tudela. Remembering a little bit of Shakespeare. And his travel up to this place and then going back. That took him 14 years, going to the Holy Land and back. And well, and that is a Jewish character. And then my first novel is based on Santa Teresa de Jesus, Jesus, Teresa de Jesus, who is a saint, but she was of Jewish origin. Her family were crypto-Judaism, crypto-Jews. And she wrote a diary of her own life. That is true. And I decided to write another diary, false, which is not true, in which she was at the convent and with all the Catholic rules, etc. And then in her, she was thinking, oh, today I should be celebrating Purim, and I should be celebrating Rosh Hashanah, etc. And that is another new historical novel. And that is why I have all this Jewish tradition in my books, and also in my poems, poetry books. And what was the other part of the question, Dorothy? Well, the same identity. I also wrote to my grandmother in Spain, which I didn't know in all my life, because in the Spanish Civil War, some people went out, but some couldn't go out. And they have also two lives, even if they were not Jewish, but if they were Republicans, and they had to be something in their houses and something outside. So part of my family remained there, and my grandmother on my Jewish side, I wrote to her sometimes and asked her for Jewish words, and she knew them. She knew these words, and also she told me that the last name of the family, which in Spanish is Sacristan, in Hebrew it was Shamash, and that is what the Inquisition made them to the converts, to translate their Hebrew names into Spanish. And it sounded very Catholic, Sacristan, no? How is it in English?
Sacristan. I mean,
The
there's
same?
another way to say it, sacristan.
Well, okay. So, well, this is part of the story.
I'm going to move on for a moment to the idea of reimagining old stories. You and I talk about time and timelessness in stories. And in the past, just like with Angelina, you've rewritten very famous stories, like the story of Tamar, the story of Cain and Abel, of Jocasta, of Oedipus. And you like to reach into the way past as a medievalist, but also as a person who appreciates the human story, and the human story that's essentially timeless. but you disrupt those stories. When you tell the story of Oedipus, you tell it a different way. When you tell the story of Tamar, you change things around. Why do you like to disrupt and reimagine some of humanity's oldest stories?
Well, because repeating the same is not interesting. You know, the story of these characters is the original, the real story is very interesting. But if I was attracted by those characters, to saying the same thing, even if, with different words, but it's not important. So I always go to the inner part and say what they couldn't say. For example, in the story of Yocasta, it's a short story, and it happens only in the moment that Oedipus is climbing the stairs to see her future wife, but he doesn't know that it is the mother. So it was incest. This doesn't appear in the original story. The mother also didn't know that that man was his son. So she didn't know that she was committing incest. But what I decided is that the mother, Yocasta, recognizes the son, and she marries him knowing he is the son, his son. So that's very interesting. Well, it's
Well,
a
it's super
transgression. A
interesting.
transgression, absolutely. Yes.
Yes, the transgressive aspect of your literature, it's something I can recommend to the entire audience, is that while we've been talking about a lot of history and very neat and tidy things, that your literature is highly transgressive. You're always looking for another way in to stories that are archetypal. And you say it's because it's more interesting that way, and it definitely is. But it seems to me that reading you, there's also an effort to center real women's voices. Like Jocasta becomes more real to me when I read about her in your story. Is centering women in your work important to you?
Century?
Centering, focusing on.
Oh, centering, yes. Oh, yes, because this is an opportunity to find out about women, but from the woman side. For example, Flaubert wrote about the woman and some other writers from the point of view. But I don't know if it was correct or not. I don't know if what I write is also correct or not. It's just my imagination. O sea, you don't have to believe me. Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's a field that it's very interesting also to not only say good things about a woman from a point of view of a woman, but also saying these terrible things naturally. Because she is not, for example, Yocasta, excuse me, is not horrified. She enjoys being the couple of her son. So it's terrible. And that's what I want to also, because I think that we all, not always, but sometimes think very terrible things, but don't say even to the closest person. You remain silent. So I wanted that idea of taking out your inner world, but in a terrible manner. I come across many times with Freud also. I tell stories about Freud and what he was thinking. And then something that you like, Dorothy, is the humor, no?
Absolutely. And I wanted to talk about humor briefly. I know we're coming up on our time here, but you use a lot of humor. I find you terribly funny in a very profound way. And humor is a terribly difficult thing to translate. And I'm just going to talk to the audience about that. Your unprologue at the beginning of Arrhythmias, you use the word desproposito, which is a marvelous word that has tremendous density of meaning. And you use it in a humorous way. Desproposito, for those who don't speak Spanish, is defined more or less as nonsense. But nonsense, while it would have been an appropriate word to use as a translation, is not Angelina's point. And we ended up with the title of that essay as "This is not a prologue," because a proposito is a purpose. So it was like an unpurpose. And we talked about this, and you spoke about Magritte's work, Ceci pas un pipe. And the idea is this is not a prologue. And it's funny if you know the context in which it emerges from. It may be a little disruptive, transgressive for the person reading the book. So your humor has a lot of meaning and a lot of purpose. It does a lot of work in your literature. Does a title like "This is not a prologue" or "Desproposito" exist to remind us that language can betray the truth, just like images can?
In fact, the word doesn't exist in Spanish. I created despropósito. And because many books start with a prologue or with a propósito, also called propósito, but never despropósito. And because I am saying then, this book, you don't have to read it because it's out of order. That's why it is arrhythmias. So now here comes the problem of translation, Dorothy. So I think that what you find, this is not a prologue, is exactly the idea of despropósito. And with a nod, how you said to Magritte, because Magritte, when he painted a pipe, it was a pipe, but of course it wasn't. You couldn't take the pipe from the painting and
smoke it.
and smoke because it was. So it is and it is not. It's the problem with realism in literature or in any art, because if you follow the story of all the arts, it is real and it is not real, everything. So I think that and that is why this title, "This is not a prologue," was exactly the idea. So you don't have to translate exactly word by word, but to find the essence, the inner what the author was thinking, and take it into the other language. So also translation is an exile from the original language to the one you are translating, and you go
Exactly. Translation is an exile.
Yes.
It absolutely is. So I'd just like to ask you, Angelina, and I'd like to read just a couple of sentences from Arrhythmias that I find describe your style perfectly. You write, "Arrhythmia rejects the drop by drop, the weights on the scale, trials, authority, courts, societies, academies, the seasons, the hands of the clock, the decimal system, the planetarium, the law of gravity, and thus it is the ultimate good time, the tricky shortcut, rules and order gone topsy-turvy. It loves, on the other hand, swaying back and forth, earthquakes, shipwrecks, sicknesses, the stock market, because who knows, right? The unexpected, interruptions, the unseen, the unheard of, the unverifiable, and it stops telling to be more telling. Those last two sentences, Angelina, to stop telling, to be more telling, stop me in my tracks. I wonder if you'd reflect a little bit on this thought, to stop telling, to be more telling.
It's the same that we can saying in different words, because silence is full of meaning. The moment you don't say a word, even though there is a Spanish saying, "Don't say a word," it's full of silence, of meaning, of thoughts, of possibilities. It is the essence of music and poetry, and of course of literature, poetry. And as I told you, there is a Spanish saying that I think in English it is very similar. Word is silver, silence is gold. And there are other expressions like the sunrise or the sunset. And as the one I told you at the beginning, I don't have words. When you need to say many, many, many words, you don't have words, or I am wordless. The same, the silence is full of possibilities.
The silence is full of possibilities. I think I want to leave my part of this there because that is so beautiful. And it says so much about what you have done and what you've taught me in translating you is the value of that silence and the value of speaking in a way that is, and writing in a way that is compact and powerful. So I am going to thank you very much and turn this over to Daniel and Rona.
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you again, Daniel and Rona. And thank you. I have no words.
If I could begin by asking a couple questions that I had. First of all, Angelina, is, we had this book gathering this week where we discussed your beautiful book, Arrhythmias, that Dorothy translated. I have one question that connects to the book and another question that sort of is more general and thinking about it from a perspective of Judaism that's so important to your identity and to your writing. I thought it was so interesting what you were saying now about choosing to, that you had discovered that you come from this line of crypto-Judaism, crypto-Jews, but you decided to embrace that Judaism, both in your identity and in your writing. But it could have been very easy to not, right? To just, it may be easier to not be Jewish, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so why, especially like when in your writing, it shows so much of the hardship. And I think at some point, even in your book, you say it's hard to be a Jew. And in this imagined conversation between Hannah Arendt and Simone Weil, right? And so it's hard to be a Jew, and yet you embrace this Judaism. And so I wonder why. Why did you choose to embrace this?
Well, because as I started learning about Judaism, I found it so near to me. as if I was discovering something that I had lost, and then I found it again. As it happens in the house, sometimes you don't know where is something, and then you find. So it was happiness for me, even if, as you said, sometimes it's difficult. And for example, I have an anecdote. When I was a small girl, I was in the door of my house waiting for the school bus. At this moment, my mother was inside, and I was alone in the street. And then a man that was a beggar, and I think he was drunk, looked at me and said, I don't know how to translate this, but something like, "Oh, you Jewish something bad girl." So he insulted me. He didn't know I was Jewish, Catholic, Islamic, I don't know, because I was silent at the door of the house. So he insulted me and he continued walking and he went away. And then my reaction, instead of having fear or something like that, I was happy. And I told my mother when she came out, they recognize me. Because I thought that my physical appearance was very Jewish. And so that man that was a beggar was drunk called me something bad Jewish. So instead of, as I told you, being afraid, I was very happy. He recognized me. So that's part of the story. And since that, well, like continues, I have told in my books. And I told, it was the first time that in the Faculty of Letters in the UNAM, I inaugurated the course of Spanish Sephardic studies in the Middle Ages. It was for the first time. And then something very, very interesting. When I taught that class, many times one of the pupils or two, the others went away, stay. And they asked me, well, my grandmother used to say this and that. Do you think maybe I am from Greater Judaism? Well, maybe, because in Mexico, many crypto Jews came. I have also written about those in Mexico. So that's why.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Angelina, it strikes me that your first name starts with a capital A, and of course that's also Alpha in the Hebrew alphabet, and then other alphabets as well. And you write about it in this chapter from The Trickster of Toledo about the power of the letter. Have you ever thought about being a capital A person, and what is your omega? Is it the work? Is it how do you find the power in the letter as a writer?
Oh, and that is something I found out in Judaism because of the Kabbalists. Because
Kabbalah.
yes, the Kabbalah takes into account every letter, and what is very interesting in Hebrew language, when it is written, you don't have the vowels; it's just consonants. So you have to find out. Well, there are some semi-vowels, but in general, you don't have the vowels, just the consonants. And that's very interesting because then you can have different interpretations of the text. That is why the Kabbalist don't come from the other Kabbalist. He has his own theory because every word he can translate it in different ways. And also another important thing in the Hebrew language, it doesn't have capital letters. They are all small letters. No, how would you call them?
Lowercase.
See. So that gives also the idea of equal. You are equal. This and that and the other is equal. I don't have to capitalize a letter. We are, well, that is why Marx made his theory. Don't pay attention to what I say.
That's lovely. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very, very much. Really, you are my friends.
Angelina, one of the things that also we discussed when talking about arrhythmias was this feeling that when I was talking to Misha, Professor Klein, about it, was that I felt that there is something about this book that's very bold. And to me, I felt like there was, because of the fact that you wrote this when you're sort of in later stage, when you were older, right? And you not as a young woman, but as an older, wise woman, that something that I accepted about that. And I loved the boldness of an older woman writing this book and just saying, I've written a strange book and this is not a prologue, and just sort of allowing yourself to do things. And I wondered if you felt that this is a book that you maybe couldn't have written when you were younger and that had to have written when you were older.
No, I don't think so. Because as I have tell you very quickly, some of my early writings like Yocasta or like some others, I found a continuity in my in my writing. So no, I don't think it has to do with age, but maybe if you want to think it like that. But as I started, or Santa Teresa, who was my first novel. Oh, excuse me, I cannot talk too much. That's of old age. It's very interesting, your inner process of writing. I was thinking some time ago to write a book about the process of writing that book, because each book comes out from different origins. Not that I thought, oh, I have to write about something. Sometimes it's something I read on the newspaper, a word I heard in the bus, for example. Something that my parents said, or something that a friend said. And from this small sentence, it comes out all the rest. But I don't know.
For Dorothy, Jean Betancourt asked, how is it different to translate with someone who knows some English and who doesn't, and versus with someone who doesn't know any English? How's your relationship with Angelina unique in that regard?
That's a terrific question. The way that Angelina and I worked together was, first of all, lots of fun, incredibly informative, tremendously discursive, and interesting precisely because we're both bilingual. And so the way we worked, to give you an idea how it really was that I would translate about a fifth of the book. I would translate 4 or 5 of the stories. And then we'd get together and we'd have a long discussion about it after Angelina had had time to review my translation, which of course, being bilingual, she could read perfectly. And so it became what Suzanne Jill Levine, the great translator of Latin American literature from the boom and still today, my friend, calls close elaboration. So there was a great deal of close elaboration in the work that we did together because of Angelina's ability to really read my translation as an English reader. And that work together informed the translation, and it also transformed my life, because it's one thing to translate a text, it's another thing to shape it and discuss it with its author and to learn from that process. So that for me was unique. I have never translated a book that way before. And having an author who can really not only understand what you've written in your translation, but can also appreciate the musicality or what you're trying to achieve in English was just a huge pleasure for me. I think Angelina knows that. It's been an amazing pleasure to work with her and to learn from her and to play with her. Because one thing that should not be forgotten is that Angelina is not just a famous scholar and a well-known writer. She's also really a lot of fun. And our conversations are always filled with laughter. And I hope that that sense of fun reflects in the book itself.
Well, I want to add something also. Yes, it was very delightful working with Dorothy. And I also learned from her, from English, from many things. And I used to call it tennis ball playing, ping pong, because the ball went and then back, and that's it.
First, I'll add the comment from, is it Jean Betancourt, where Angelina, she also says that she was thrilled that you've written a story about an intersex person who's living and working as both a woman and a man, and the first intersex surgeon, and just sort of reinforce, I think this comment reinforces sort of the value of bringing these stories the way that you do. And then the last question is from Hadass Cohen, and she asks, she said, I wanted to ask about arrhythmias. Why did you choose to start the book with the story of the Frankfurt scholars and their theories, right? With Adorno and who else am I thinking of? Benjamin, right? Or is I'm not so up to date with the Frankfurt scholars, but why did you start with your book on the Frankfurt scholars and their theories? And do you find that their story tells the story of the 20th century in some respect?
Oh yes, because I have read their books, and I think they are very important for the philosophy and the thinking of our time, because they choose and pick up themes, subjects that were valid to our time, and they were continuous. So it's like Plato and all those philosophers of all ages. So that is why. And I also make them appear in some novels. Walter Benjamin appears in one novel that is called The Romantic Sephardic, and is a Sephardic character. This is a man in the 20th century. And but as Hannah Arendt also interests me because she's a polemic author. Someone accuses her of saying the banality of evil. Evil. And some others, like Gershon Scholem and some others, found that it was not the banality of evil; it was something something deeper, more profound, more. So that is why, and her personal life, why she was connected with Heidegger and things like that, and how they interchange letters after the Second World War. So that's it.
Thank you. So maybe at that point we'll bring it to an end. This was just so wonderful. I don't know if Daniel, you wanted also, but Angelina and Dorothy, thank you so much for your time and sharing sharing your time with us and your thoughts. This has really truly been an honor and a privilege, and we're very grateful to you.
We are also very grateful to you, because time is another subject of my books, because time is so arrhythmic also. It may be boring for some and maybe fun for others. So thank you for your time also.
I also am very, very grateful to both of you, to all of you at the Schusterman Center, to you, Rona, to Daniel, for this opportunity to meet you all, because we've collaborated for many years, Daniel and I. We've never met before. So this is wonderful. And of course, anytime I get to be with Angelina is, for me, the ultimate good time. So it is really a joy and a pleasure, and I feel it's a privilege to be here. Thank you so much.
The same. A big hug.
Thank you all. I hope our paths cross soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Adios.
Adiós. Hasta luego. Ciao.